Let's make a super simple plant-based stew. Now, this is one of my favorite things to eat. Derica is not as big of a fan, but she'll eat it because of certain things that we do in it, like these. This is a dried shiitake mushroom. I have 10 of them. I am going to cut them into 3 pieces each. They squeak. Just like that, 3 pieces each into a pot. By the way, yes, you can use fresh mushrooms if you really want to, but the dried mushrooms, just the way they work, actually adds an extra level of umami and just this meaty flavor to the dish. That's why Derica likes it. Next up, we have some celery. And I just have 2 ribs of celery cut into 2 pieces each because that's just the way we have to store them. And I'm literally just cutting chunks. It's a rustic dish. Make it chunky. You do want to cut off the nasty bits though. But these go to make more broth. Next, some carrots. We have 4. That's probably about right. If you have really, really big carrots, you might need 3. As you can tell, there's very specific volumes for this recipe. These also go into the broth. And these just, bite-sized pieces. I don't want to, like eat a half a carrot in one bite, but that's a good size. When I was growing up, my mom used to make stew, and obviously it was a different kind of stew than this, but she would freeze a bunch of it, and I worked nights at one job that I had for a while, so I would get home really, really late, and everybody had already eaten dinner, and it was always my favorite thing to go into the freezer, and there was either stew, hot dogs and beans, or chili. Almost always. She actually put them in cool containers, because that's what you did. And they were frozen, and I would eat like the whole cooler container full of whatever it was. And next, potatoes, because every stew needs to have potatoes. These are just plain old white potatoes. And we have like 4, some of them are a little on the small side, it's okay. We're just cubing them up.
Now notice we did not peel the potatoes nor the carrots.
Heck no, don't peel them. It's the best part.
We did scrub them with a vegetable brush, but that's all was necessary.
Cut them up into pieces about that big. If you have weird, odd bits in your potatoes, just cut them out. They go in the broth bowl. One really nice thing about stew is you can pretty much use whatever you've got lying around. Like if you have extra something, you can put it in here. It's not going to change the recipe that drastically to add or remove things if you don't care for things. It's usually not a super high calorie thing anyway because of the way it's made. There's no oil being added. There's no extra fats being added. There's obviously no animal products being added. So all those extra calories aren't going to be here. And last but not least of our prep is a large onion. And, again, cut off the nasty bits. I keep meaning to make a video on how to chop an onion because there's a lot of ways to do it. Some of them are good, not all. These go in the broth bowl, along with the peels. And I try to take off as little of the peel as I need to. Like, see that? Some people take off that whole outer layer. There's no need. That's edible. You can eat that. With these, going for a rough chop again. So pretty big chunks, really. Like that. They're going to break down as they cook, though. So it'll be pieces, not chunks, when it's done. I just had a little brown piece in the middle of it. I don't want to eat it. It's a nasty bit now. Strong onion. Getting me a little bit. Wow. That usually doesn't happen. Okay. But wait. There's more. Next. Well, we're not putting any animal products in this, but we are putting in something that's a meat-like replacement, and these are soy chunks. These are basically like really big TVP, or textured vegetable protein. We love these things. I have 2 cups here. This serves probably 4 people, this stew, by the way. So it's like half cup per person.
Next up is 2 cups of spinach.
And we just have pre-washed spinach here, 2 cups. It's like 2 good-sized handfuls, usually. Get your greens in. It's good.
1 cup each of green beans and corn. We choose frozen for this because in green beans, they're pre-cut for you and you don't have to mess with them. You don't end up with slimy beans in your refrigerator. And with corn, they're pre-kerneled for you.
And it's just convenient to measure out.
Yeah.
We just get bigger bags of them, measure out what we need each time, close it back up, put it in the freezer, and save it for next time.
A tablespoon each of oregano, thyme, and basil.
Okay, so I'm going to eyeball a tablespoon. Which one is this?
That's oregano.
Oregano. Yeah, it's about a tablespoon. As I said, forgiving recipe. This is the basil. You can use the herbs of your choice. Rosemary is a nice one in this as well. But my favorite is thyme. So I'm going to use like a tablespoon and a half of thyme because I like thyme. Sage is also nice in this. I'm not doing that today, but you totally can.
So speaking of that broth that we keep mentioning, this is the
last of it.
The last of it.
It's about 4 cups.
I really need to make more. So ideally, you want to use all broth as your liquid for this, so that way you have as much flavor as possible.
Or you can use like a better than bouillon or something like that.
Yep.
We happen to have used up the last of our better than bouillon the other day.
Yes.
So.
But also, if you noticed, many of the veggies that Brian used to make this stew are actually the leave-ins that I used to make the broth.
Yeah,
so it's going to make more of its own broth just in the cooking process. So with that in mind, we are going to add water to cover.
Now, I got a big chunk of ice because we had to pull that broth out of the freezer. So I'm just going to nestle that down in there. But as you can tell, it's not super critical about any of it. And I'm melting the ice with the water as it goes in. So, and again, just to cover. It's going to cook for a while, but you don't want it to be too soup. Like you want it to be a stew. Pardon me while I use my knife to just kind of shove some of the stuff under the liquid. As you can see, it's just to cover. It's not really like overly full because some of those things are actually going to absorb liquid, like the soy chunks and the mushrooms. They are going to absorb liquid as this cooks. But now we're gonna move over to the stove, bring this up to a boil, then bring it back down to a bare simmer for about an hour. Okay, we're about halfway through our 1 hour cook time, and what I want to do now is start adding some other things to this. Most of our veggies are pretty well cooked. The carrots are still a little bit on the firm side, so it's not quite ready yet, but we want to add a little bit of browning, and for that, I love this Kitchen Bouquet browning sauce. I have written down on the recipe just a half tablespoon, but yeah, about that much is really all you need. And something else that I like to use to add a little umami and extra depth is soy sauce. So for this recipe, I'm just going to be adding about a tablespoon of soy sauce. It just adds an extra richness and meatiness that you don't get any other way, really. And the difference between a soup and a stew, in my opinion, is thickening. So we're going to make a slurry. This is just a 1/4 cup of flour. Any flour will do. You can even use chickpea flour, non-gluten flour, anything like that. Just going to add a little bit of water and whisk this up to make a slurry. You don't want any lumps, so you want to do a thorough job of mixing this. Okay, now that that's all mixed up, I'm just going to add it right in and use the whisk to get everything in there. It's going to thicken up fairly quickly, so I want to work quick to get everything out of here and then mix that all through. You'll see a color change almost instantly. Yep, that's the bouquet browning sauce going in there, and then the slurry is definitely going to have an effect real soon. It's going to start to thicken almost immediately. Okay, we have a little bit of thickening happening, but it's not quite done cooking yet, so I'm going to turn the heat up to about 2.5 to 3, and we're going to let this go for another half hour. I brought this back up to roughly a boil because I wanted to see how thick it was actually going to get. And if you look, see, it didn't thicken all that much. Sometimes your flour or your slurry just didn't work as well. By the way, you can also use a cornstarch slurry for this if you prefer cornstarch to flour. That works just as well. But in this case, I just made another little batch of slurry, and I'm going to add that to it. Just get that in there. The wheat slurry really does need to come roughly to a boil before it'll actually start to thicken. Cornstarch doesn't need quite as much heat, so cornstarch might be preferable to some people. Okay, now we're starting to see some thickening, so I'm going to bring this back down to just a simmer and let it go for half an hour. And I almost forgot, some fresh cracked black pepper. About 1/2 teaspoon to 3/4 teaspoon. Derica really likes black pepper, so we tend to use a lot of it. I'm going to give that a stir through. You can already see it's starting to thicken up nicely. Give that a little bit more time, and then we'll be back for the tasting. It's done. It's in a bowl. It's ready to go.
It's really hot.
But the idea is to get a little bit of everything on the spoon. It does thicken more as it sits. This is still really, really hot. You can probably see the steam coming off of it.
I'm just going to get my favorite part, which is his mushroom.
While this cools, I'm going to talk about storage options for this. stew, like many things, is actually better the next day. So if you really want to make this amazing, make it today, eat it tomorrow. We're going to unfortunately have to eat most of this today, though that's a lot of stew. I don't think we could eat the whole thing.
It does freeze really well.
Oh, yeah, that too.
You may find that after you re-defrost it, that's the right term, right? That you may actually need to add more liquid. For some reason, the freezing process seems to take some of the liquid out of any soup, stew, chili, any of those type of things.
Well, I think the mushrooms will keep absorbing liquid, and so will the soy chunks. So those two things right alone will definitely do that. This has a lovely flavor. If you wanted to add salt, you can. We tend to try not to.
All the vegetables still have enough substance to them. They're not cooked into oblivion, which I really like. Also, the thickening of the broth gives it a really lovely,
it's like
velvety texture.
Yeah. It's almost like gravy.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is wonderful. It's really nice to have on a cold day, but I can eat stew basically year round. I love this stuff. I think it's awesome. You can, of course, substitute various different vegetables in here, all you want. And the nutrition level is going to change depending on that, the number of calories. Like you can put more potatoes in. If you put less potatoes in, it's going to have less calories. More potatoes will be more calories. But otherwise, it's actually a fairly low calorie meal.
Yep.
So stew, go make some. And as always, guys, thanks so much for watching. We'll see you next time on The Bistro.